Alex, it's a pleasure to have you today, and we're very thankful that you accept to have this interview and talk to us about all the research and the reflections that you have been leading around artificial intelligence technology and how it impacts in positive, negative ways our daily life and in the universities, our academic doings. No? In fact, the idea of having this conversation is related to two things. First, here at our institution, el Colegio de México, there has been a lot of discussion, a lot of uncertainty, polarized positions around artificial intelligence and what it means for our research, our teaching, a lot of discussion around the ethics and how our artificial intelligence sort of challenges many of the ethical principles that we have in higher education. And within this discussion, we decided to prepare a dossier of our open access journal, Otros Diálogos, around artificial intelligence. So it's a pleasure to have you here and as part of this discussion. The dossier is being coordinated by Alfonso Medina and myself. Alfonso Medina is director of the Center for Linguistic and Literary Studies, and he is he has a PhD on linguistics, computational linguistics.
It is a pleasure to meet you. And we formulated a series of a few questions that may be a little naive for you, but nevertheless, we'd like to hear your ideas. The first question is
naive.
We feel a little
naive. His territory, so there's nothing too naive.
Okay. The first question is, what is the distance between Asimov's idea of what artificial intelligence should do and should not do, and the real policies related to the development of artificial intelligence technology?
So that's a fun question, and you may be aware that I actually wrote a book that talks directly about that. The book is actually almost 15 years old now, though it's heavily cited. And the book was called Moral Machines Teaching Robots Right from Wrong. And we note from the very beginning that people think that Asimov has already solved that problem, that if artificial intelligence just had these basic rules, one, that it should not hurt humans, it should follow what humans ask it to do, and then engage in self-preservation. And later he added a fourth law, the Zeroff law, which was that it should do what was in the interest of humanity. The funny thing is that Asimov wrote almost 80 stories around these laws, and nearly every story was how these simple, rather straightforward ethical principles would not work very well. So you would have a case where a robot might have commands from two humans at the same time. How does it know what to do? Or you might have a situation where you had a surgeon with a knife in his hand over an individual on a battlefield, and how would the robot know that that individual was there to help the person, not to harm them? So Asimov's laws, they're very nice, but he showed basically that simple, straightforward laws are not going to be effective for ensuring that the behavior of artificial intelligence will be correct. Now, within the field of artificial intelligence, well, before the field of artificial intelligence really took off in this way, there were a bunch of philosophers and some computer scientists who started thinking about machine morality or machine ethics. And they started this new field of research. But as the AI researchers came into that discussion, they were not really satisfied with what the philosophers and ethicists were saying about how you might make robots and AI sensitive to human considerations. And they adopted an idea that they called value alignment. The problem with value alignment was that it presumed that you had very advanced systems that could actually deduce from looking at human behavior what the right thing to do would be, and that they would then follow those prescriptions. Well, that's a bit naive because it's well beyond the capacity of even the artificial intelligence systems we have today. And if AI was just observing human behavior, well, it might learn to be greedy, or it might learn to be violent in certain respects. So you still need some kind of normative ethical framework for systems to make decisions. And to date, we really have not developed systems sophisticated enough to follow even a prescribed ethical plan, let alone make sophisticated decisions. There's also this more advanced question, which I think is highly skeptical, but it's kind of, if you had a very sophisticated AI system, would it pursue its own goals and work around or ignore any ethical considerations that you had built into it? As a fictional device, Asimov had proposed that the laws, his laws, the 3 laws of robotics, would be built right into the positronic brain. So they would be part of the foundational operating system of the robot, and therefore it'd be very difficult to work around them. But the simple point is today we don't have systems that can really think about ethics in any meaningful manner. At the best, we get what we called operational ethics. At the best, we get behavior that is hard programmed into a system by the engineers who design the system. And that presumes they can deduce in advance all the situations that that system will encounter. That was a great notion, but now we are getting into AI systems where the engineers can't even predict what the behavior of AI systems will be as they encounter new circumstances. So they're still kind of black boxes. They are not transparent, and therefore we don't have any way of ensuring that the behavior of an AI system would be in line with what we would want it to do. And if I could go on, that's kind of one of the big problems we confront today is AI is being integrated into more and more systems, every facet of modern life. As it's being brought into control systems, we don't necessarily know whether it has adequate intelligence to be able to deal with new challenges as they arise, or as it's operating in a complex environment, it may give rise to behavior that no one predicted that it would have. So that's one of the big ethical concerns, that you can't fully control AI systems, that on occasions they will act in ways that you find erratic or that are really low probability actions, and therefore many of us are seriously concerned about the integration of today's AI systems into control systems, into systems that make decisions in one form or another. They don't make decisions the way you and I do, but they have to choose between alternatives and might choose an alternative that they really don't understand the implication of that alternative.
The second idea, it's about one of your areas of interest, which is bioethics, understood as the ethical reflection of an interaction of humans with a living environment, especially with humans and other living organisms, but also with medical as well as biotechnical applications. What are your insights on bioethics in relation to artificial intelligence?
So bioethics in relationship to artificial intelligence, well, there's a kind of difficulty here in that bioethics often deals with very real challenges we have today. So bioethics deals with medical ethics, with research ethics, with the certification of drugs and new devices. And one of the fascinating things for me is that we have gone through rigorous processes that decide when a new drug or new device can be utilized, whether that's in a hospital or some other situation. We have nothing comparable today in AI. So AI corporations are often deploying devices that no one outside of the corporation has said is safe or has lived up to any standards. So that's one of the things that concerns me a bit. But it also concerns me about biotechnologies, because it's also possible now with synthetic biology for us to create from scratch a new biological substance that does not exist in nature, or even a new organism that either does not exist in nature or that is an organism that's altered from its original state. So you might have, let's say, locusts that do not swarm, or mosquitoes that cannot carry malaria. Now, those both seem like characteristics that would be nice if we could engineer out, but we have no idea in the complex biological environments we have what it would mean to introduce these new organisms or these new variations of existing organisms, and whether the absence of one feature may actually cause a collapse in the ecosystem within which they are functioning. So this is a big issue with biotechnologies, but I would say it's not necessarily so dissimilar from what we're seeing with artificial intelligence, where we're introducing artificial intelligences into complex social environments, and they're disrupting those environments in ways that could be very destabilizing. So that's one of the concerns that's been raised with generative AI, these new large language models and some visual models such as DALL-E, that they can do new things, but they can also be used to create false information. They might be actually contributing toward introducing information or circumstances in our social environments that can disrupt our social environments in dramatic ways. The example I often use will be the simple ability to create, let's say, a video that looks like President Joe Biden in the United States. And it would be simple enough to introduce a video that would get widely distributed the day before the next US election of him falling flat on his face. And that could determine the election, but not only determine the election in America, but alter the geopolitical balances throughout the world. So I think this is a situation we're getting into that without appropriate testing, without appropriate verification of how these systems are functioning, they can be introduced into social environments and have a destabilizing impact on social environments, sometimes because they are misused or sometimes because they are intentionally abused. But that can even happen when they are not misused or abused, just because the systems on occasion will act in erratic ways that nobody had anticipated.
Can I jump in there? I have a question there, because it seems to me that the velocity of how this false information may be created and is diffused, it is so rapid that by the time people get to verify and get to publish, for example, that it was not that it was false information, it's the in between is where you have this potential destabilizing effect. Are you optimistic about the possibility of intervening in a certain way on that via the regulation of AI?
No, I'm not optimistic. I think this problem of misinformation is truly serious, and the problem is misinformation also impacts upon cognitive biases that human beings have. So we have our biases are just sort of errors and consistent errors and judgments we humans make because of the nature of our mental makeup. And one of those errors is a confirmation bias. So now you have the distribution of false information, and people are going to continue to believe that even if it's been demonstrated that it's false. That's the situation we have in the United States right now. But even no matter how often that you point out that information is false, those who want to believe it will continue to believe it. So the second thing is, I don't think we have artificial intelligence systems that can even move quickly enough to filter out bad information or misuse of information. So even if the corporations, or even if we, society at large, demanded that those filters be put on the systems so that they were less usable, that might ameliorate some of the harms, but it's not going to make them totally go away. And there are other problems that if you demand those kinds of filters, whether those filters themselves will have biases built into them, whether those filters will serve certain political interests and not other political interests, or whether if those safety mechanisms are all controlled by the leading corporations, what I call the AI oligopoly, whether we will decide, well, tools created by the AI oligopoly are safer than others, and then we outlaw the use of those tools by anyone else, we contribute to a decentralization of power, which is anti-democratic. So the problem here is that AI itself probably can't solve all the problems that it creates, or that problems that it makes available for people who want to misuse AI, and that the tensions this will create in society will go on. And the difficulty is only, can we create societies that understand this well enough, and there's enough goodwill or enough faith in good intentions that people are not going to just buy into information that is put in front of them. I hope that as we get a little deeper into this, people will look more suspiciously at a photograph and ask whether that's real or whether that's been distorted, for example. And it is possible that we may be able to create tools that label photographs well enough so that you, for example, will be able to go over the photograph and you'll be able to see a marking that would indicate to you that this photograph has not been tampered on. But we have not got to that point yet. That's something that, for example, the image companies such as Shutterstock and Adobe are looking at for images to see if they can ensure that fake images are easily determined. But none of that's in place now. And some of that will be created by the corporations who care about, let's say, the authenticity of the information, but others may actually require governmental guidelines. And here's where we come into the biggest problem at all. Technology policy for decades has been daunted by two issues. One is known as the pacing problem, and that's the rapid pace at which technologies get deployed, but the slow pace at which we put in place effective ethical legal guidelines. The other problem was first put forward by David Collingridge in a book in 1980. And he basically said it's easiest to shape a technology early in its development. But early in its development, you don't necessarily know what the problems are. And by the time you do know what the problems are, the technology has become so integral to your socio-technical fabric that it's very hard to change it. So that's what we've encountered with social media. Early in the development of social media, we didn't realize all the problems it would create. Now we know the problems, but people are so addicted to and submerged in social media that it becomes very difficult to alter it. And with generative AI, this problem has become exacerbated. And why it's become exacerbated is because of what I call the collapse in the adoption cycle. Cell phones, social media, these were all technologies that took years to proliferate very broadly. In a matter of 2 months, 100 million people were using ChatGPT. And it's now becoming ubiquitous in some of our societies. So its adoption, and one could argue it may not be totally integrated into our society, has been so quick that it's going to be very hard, even tomorrow, to introduce guidelines that would restrict it being deployed in harmful ways. So I think that's one of the most serious issues we're encountering, which is that unlike biotechnologies, most of which have to go through some kind of testing and certification before they can be deployed, we don't have that for artificial intelligence at the moment. And companies, therefore, are given largesse to not only deploy these technologies, but they aren't being held culpable and liable if anything goes wrong, so they've got very little to lose. And to make matters worse, we have corporate capture in many of our governments. These companies have become so rich that they have inordinate influence in the decision-making processes of our governments, even our democratic governments. So they may actually be able to undermine the passing of laws that could make them more responsible for the technologies they deploy, at the same time that they say they're asking for some kinds of governance of technologies. But my fear is that the kind of governance they want is the kind of governance that will lock others out of using these technologies and will secure their control of the most advanced forms of artificial intelligence.
Very interesting. What is the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence initiative? What is its scope?
The ethics and governance of artificial intelligence initiative. So you're talking about the work I've been doing over the last few weeks, or you're talking about the work over the last few years?
Well, it could be a compound of the last few years.
Many years ago, I and my colleague Gary Marchant at Arizona State University started talking about the need for governance of emerging technologies, and we made proposals about how that could be created to create more agile institutions. We then went on to talk about global governance of systems, and we saw artificial intelligence and synthetic biology as the first two of the emerging technologies. And let us be clear, we have many emerging technologies now, but we'll have emerging technologies 10 years from now that nobody's even thinking of today. So we started thinking about what kind of institutions could be put in place to effectively govern those. I actually was organizing an international congress for the governance of artificial intelligence that was to happen in Prague in May 2020. You all know what happened in 2020. So the day after I saw 3 COVID cases move into the Czech Republic, I had to call the city of Prague and say we were canceling. And it took them about a week to realize we had done them a favor. But just 2 weeks later, everything shut down. Well, now here we went through this COVID period where, because of Zoom and because people were at home, actually the growth and the power of the IT industry grew dramatically. And then we had these release of more sophisticated AI products, such as generative AI products. And this has created serious concern. So I again tried to reinitiate reflection on how we would put in place global governance for artificial intelligence. A lot of people, if you've noticed over the last few months, have been calling for governance of many forms, including, as I mentioned, many companies within the AI oligopoly. Sam Altman from OpenAI has been calling for this, but it's not clear what they're calling for, what they want to be governed, nor what kind of institutions could be brought into place. So we decided to move quickly on this, and we brought together meetings at UNESCO and the ITU within the last few weeks. And after the ITU meeting, or during the ITU meeting, we were asked if we could put together a preliminary framework for the governance of AI. So we have done so. We have proposed at least 5 components that are symbiotically affect each other, that if we started building those components, we might be able to put in place a more agile framework for the governance of AI, for the international governance of AI. A critical component is a global AI observatory. At the moment, there is nothing out there that really knows all the different initiatives, that has a comprehensive vision of what's developing in artificial intelligence, of who the players are and whether they're repeating each other's work. So we thought that was a good place to start. But then that could go on and create various registries of critical information, such as adverse information, adverse incidents, that would help governments in regulating the technologies, or at least help them be aware of what some of the challenges would be. So that's one of the components. But we had proposed, as I say, 5 components. And the idea there is first and foremost to deepen the understanding and conversation about global governance in the hope that we can move much more expeditiously to put something in place. I'm less concerned with whether our ideas are what are taken up or that we are the drivers of that governance, than that we just get those who care about putting in place some effective measures to ensure that we limit the harm that these technologies can perform, and therefore can derive the vast array of goods that we can get from them, that they are able to move quickly on that.
Can I jump in? Yeah, I would like to ask a question regarding education. No, so from the comprehensive scenario that you have just depicted, we have a defacing in terms of timing. No, so we may be moving towards these global governance and principles and around the AI that will take time to build. We, at the same time, you say, well, even if we start with very specific regulations, or we try to control certain things, or even ban the use of certain things, we know that that's not necessarily going to happen. But you also talk about, for example, when you, in terms of the generation of false information, about the cognitive biases that we have, no? So probably one thing that we need to start discussing is how to adjust the whole educational process to respond to these changes in daily life in all these dimensions that are not related to AI. Of course, that it's also a change that takes time, it takes generations, no? But how do you think, or what role do you think education can play in changing the way that we interact with education, or we relate to education, and especially in terms of higher education? And that's where we are, and most of our readers are also related to higher education.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating question. And as I think you understand, that generative AI has created a crisis in education. So I will ask young people, how many of them have used one of the large language models to write an essay that they've submitted for as an assignment? And it's frightening what a large percentage of them say they have. And the question, of course, there is, are they getting educated? You know, does that is that just speeding up their learning about things, or are they not learning how to think through and compose, let's say, clear essays on their own that make a point, or that at least cover the salient information? So this is this fascinating tension with artificial intelligence, is where is it enhancing our understanding, and where is it diluted it? We know that people who have access to the internet have the access to all kinds of information at their fingertips. We're all in this universe suddenly where you have a massive library at your disposal. So you can learn very quickly if that's what your intention is. And for that reason, probably first and foremost, as far as society is concerned, we need to give everybody access. But access is not enough. Access has to be encouraging people to use these tools to learn, and not just to fill rote assignments, but to really utilize them in a way of sharpening our intelligence. The second thing that I think we need to be educating in our society more broadly is what I call self-understanding. So the difficulty, this question of cognitive biases, for example, this is actually a relatively new subject going back to research by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, where they started revealing the first of the biases that they understood that the human mental apparatus was not very good at dealing with certain kinds of problems. Now, since that time, we have a vast plethora of cognitive biases that have been revealed. And some people point to those cognitive biases as indications of weaknesses in human intelligence, so why humans are not such good thinkers. But I think it can be used in the other way around, where if humans understood their propensity for these cognitive biases, they might catch themselves better. They might question, for example, when they were just confirming what they already believed and whether or not what they believed was accurate or not. The second part of that is what these online tools are doing, particularly social media. But also advertisement online. It's all about pushing your buttons, meaning sometimes pushing your cognitive biases. And I think it would be very healthy for people to have enough understanding to know when their buttons were being pushed. Now, sometimes it's obvious. If I do a search for a new carry-on piece of luggage, and then carry-on pieces of luggage start showing up on every website I go to, I kind of know, well, they caught on that that's something I'm looking for, and now they want to advertise it in front of me. But the whole business of online activity, including the use of your phone, is about capturing your attention and driving your behavior in the way that someone else wants your behavior to be driven for their purposes, whether those are commercial purposes or political purposes. It's still propaganda in one form or another. And their ability to engage in this kind of surveillance because they have your past data, they know what you've done in the past on the internet, gives them research that they can now analyze where your buttons are. So I think this is also has to be a part of modern education. How do you educate young people and the society at large to appreciate that it's in this process where our propensities, our desires, our fears, our cognitive biases are all being manipulated to produce behavior. And the behavior it's being manipulated to produce may not be in our interest. So I think that to function in this digital world, education has to be more focused on self-understanding and understanding of the human condition, and therefore a kind of internet hygiene, online hygiene, so that as you approach these tools, you approach them in a more sophisticated manner. And I think that also goes for education. If you know that your students are going to write essays that were written by one of these chatbots, then you may ask them to do something beyond that. You may ask them, okay, what did the chatbot say? Now I want you to write a second essay telling me what's wrong with what the chatbot said or what significant points it missed. And I think that's the realm we're moving into. We're trying to move into a realm where the internet and these AI tools become companions in your sharpening your own intelligence, as opposed to clandestine partners directed at their own goals rather than directed at your education.
Yeah, we agree with you, by the way.
Yes.
You know, I was at a conference that I helped found called the Governance of Emerging Technologies Conference, and we did a panel on generative AI. And this was largely, they weren't all educators, some were policymakers, but mainly educators in the room. And I asked them how many of them felt that generative AI was going to improve their ability to educate their students, to teach their students, and how many felt it was a detriment. It wasn't absolutely on one side, but it was clear that more of them felt that it was going to be a detriment in helping them teach their students how to develop discriminating minds.
Yeah, well, at the same time, in terms of the dynamics in higher education, universities are also very slow when it comes to incorporating deep changes in the way we teach, in the way we think about curricula or the skills that we are giving to our students. So it may take time. So we have one last question that has to do with universities. And yes, so you have already mentioned some specific issues, but for example, what would you suggest to universities regarding regulation or the position or the way that we are handling AI and the challenges of AI to the way we have been doing things for centuries?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think we're in a deeply problematic moment in history. This isn't just simple business as usual. We are in what some people like to call in a post-Enlightenment age. We're in an inflection point in history whereby technologies have altered our ability to manipulate the genome, to manipulate matter on the level of molecules and atoms, to manipulate information or make information more available. And I think we have not fully grasped what is going on and therefore how it's going to change education. So I asked universities to really convene emergency bodies to think through what have we been doing that works and will continue to work, and what have we been doing that really has to be overhauled. One of my colleagues came forward with an idea that I thought was kind of provocative and interesting. His name is Brad Allenby, and he's at Arizona State University. And one of the things that came up in the cognitive bias research, Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, where his basic point was to be a little suspicious of your heuristic, your fast thinking, and slow down and engage more in analytical thinking. So this has been the Enlightenment project for the last 300 years. How do you get people to be less reactive, to be less willing to go with their emotions or their upbringing and think through challenges? But now we have a very difficult problem, and the very difficult problem is information is coming at us so quickly. We don't have time to analyze it. And to make matters worse, we are dealing with a daunting set of problems in which so many values come to bear that we can't even think through what all the issues are that are entailed in that. And he, my friend Brad Allenby asked, well, whether thinking slow, that kind of Enlightenment value, is going to have much role in the future. Well, I don't know if it'll have much role in the future or not. I hope it does. But I do know that the nature of reason and reasoning has changed. And the importance of it will change for students who are bombarded with massive amounts of information. So their education may be less about getting a specialized education and more about getting a sense of the world they're in and how to navigate that world. So my own feeling is we're not only rethinking education or needing to re-envision education, but we need to re-envision what decision-making will be, what ethics will be. just to give you an example, I have been promoting what I call a somewhat different theory of ethics than has prevailed today. In the theories of ethics we have so far, it's largely about how do you achieve a certain principle or a value, and should it be treated as an absolute, or but that, or if not treating values as an absolute, is it enough to go through some kind of utilitarian calculation where you look at different options and you just select the one that gives you the greatest good for the greatest number? That's kind of what has been the core of at least ethics as a reasoning discipline, though it also has the discipline of virtue ethics, which is to cultivate character, something that has become strangely less important when it should be becoming more important. But I have argued that, well, utilitarianism is not adequate because there are certain things that, if not absolutes, nevertheless are given a high priority. And simple notions of the good or the perfect are not adequate, particularly when you have difficult challenges where a confluence of values impinge upon them. And I propose that we learn to think through the various options, various ways of addressing a challenge. And each one of those not only has the benefits it creates, the utilitarian benefits, but each one of those will have trade-offs, detriments or losses. So when we choose the best course forward, it's not enough to select our course, but we also need to address the trade-offs, the detriments. So I guess this is a way of saying I think that education has to be much more about problem solving in the future, about thinking your way through a very complex universe, how you get access to the information you need to think through complex problems, how you look at various courses of action, and how you select the best action, and what you do if that best course of action has trade-offs or undesirable societal consequences. What's your responsibility to address those also? So that's a little bit of I got on my ethical hobby horse here for a moment. But as I look at the challenges of this generation, I think that a degree more self-understanding, a degree more understanding of the human cognitive condition, and a richer appreciation of how to work through complex problems, and a kind of exposure that gives you enough of a transdisciplinary education that you know where to look for the information you need and to determine what information you need to make difficult decisions. You might get that information from ChatGPT. That's not a problem. It's what you do with that information that's the challenge.
It looks sort of appalling, but also very stimulating at the same time. It's a very creative time. Yeah.
It's like the old Chinese proverb that you should, or aphorism, may you be born in exciting times. We are in unbelievably exciting times, but we're also walking this precipice as to whether we will be able to navigate it effectively or our societies will implode under the pressure.
I'd like to ask about, related to that, should schools regulate these technologies at all? Or how much should schools be worried about regulating?
Within their community?
Within their communities. Like, should we be the police of what students do? Or should we let them be?
I think the problem, the thing is, what is your goal? If you police too hard, you actually create the various behavior you're policing. So I kind of think, particularly with young people who don't have all the filters in place yet, and will rebel if they think the authorities are dictating what they can learn or do. So I think it probably has to be a little bit more gentle. I would suspect that that policing is not going to be very effective, but what is likely to be more effective is utilizing the classroom to have conversations about what is happening, to the students as they become more and more trained by the machines to be the robots that the machines want them to be. And for them to start to appreciate that they are the robots that are being manipulated. It's not that they're robots out there, but the whole direction of these cognitive sciences, the manipulation of their behavior, then I think you'll get a bit of healthy rebellion from the students in terms of what's happening. And they like to think of themselves as independent people, and to ask them, well, do you believe that because you really thought it through, or is that just what what some pop figure has said to you?
Sure. I think that for us the values of critical thinking and autonomy are like the center of our way of teaching. So I think that it's going back to that and to what you mentioned about self-knowledge, giving them the tools via self-knowledge to face these times.
So, I think you're right on target that education should be about critical thinking and discrimination. And it may even become more about that and less about information conveyance. So that may be the point we're shifting. But what will actually constitute critical thinking as we move into this new transhuman or trans-enlightenment, post-enlightenment age? That's not fully revealed. That's yet to be discovered. And I think if you can help the students understand that this is their life and that this is their adventure and the world is changing and they're going to have to come up with new ways of adapting, and they need to be suspicious of some of the tools that are making things easy for them that you conveyed powerful lessons.
Okay. Thank you very much, Wendell. You're very generous with your time.
Thank you.